Taman stepped off the transport shuttle and into Harmony 7 for the first time. The medical station floated in neutral space, far from any single planet's control. Through the massive windows, he could see stars scattered across the darkness like thrown diamonds. He had trained for 3 years to work here, learning alien biology and universal medical protocols. But nothing prepared him for the reality of it. The station corridor stretched ahead, clean and white. Aliens of different species moved past him. Some walked on 2 legs like humans. Others floated or crawled or moved in ways he couldn't quite understand. A creature made of what looked like living crystal chimed as it passed. Something with too many eyes and fur like silver threads nodded at him. Taman tried not to stare. His supervisor met him at the main medical bay. She was human too. A woman named Hana with tired eyes and quick hands. She had worked on Harmony 7 for 5 years. "Welcome to the hardest job you'll ever love," she said, shaking his hand firmly. Taman noticed how natural the handshake felt. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed simple human contact during his journey here. Hana led him through the medical bay. The equipment looked familiar but modified. Beds floated instead of standing on legs. Scanners worked without touching patients. Robotic arms did the work that human hands usually did in Earth hospitals. "Why don't we touch the patients directly?" Taman asked. Hana stopped walking and turned to face him. Her expression became serious. "That's the most important rule here. Most alien species don't touch each other the way we do. For them, physical contact is dangerous. Some species release toxins through their skin. Others feel actual pain when touched by other species. And many species consider touch to be violent, aggressive, wrong." Taman felt confused. "But we're medical staff. How do we treat injuries without touching? Remote tools, drones, robotic arms, energy fields. There are many ways." Hana pulled up a hologram display. Numbers filled the air between them. 87% of known sentient species have cultural taboos against physical contact. Humans are unusual. We're what they call a contact-dependent species. We need touch to feel connected, to feel safe, to show care. Most aliens think that's primitive, dangerous. She dismissed the hologram with a wave. "You'll have a liaison assigned to you. Someone who makes sure you follow the rules. The no-touch protocols exist for good reasons. Break them, and you could start a diplomatic incident. Or worse." Taman's liaison arrived that afternoon. His name was Vexil, and he was Korathan. He stood slightly taller than Taman, with a lean body covered in metallic silver scales that caught the light when he moved. His eyes were large and golden with vertical pupils. When he spoke, his voice had a strange musical quality, like hearing someone talk through water. "I will be watching your work," Vexil said. No greeting. No introduction beyond his name. Humans have poor impulse control regarding physical contact. "My job is to prevent incidents." Taman felt irritation rise in his chest but pushed it down. "I understand the protocols. I trained for years. Training and practice are different things." Vexil's golden eyes didn't blink. "You will make mistakes. All humans do. I will be there to document them." The first week passed slowly. Taman treated patients using the remote tools. He learned to read alien body language, though it was harder than reading human faces. A patient would come in with injuries, and he would guide robotic arms to clean wounds, apply bandages, administer medicine. It felt wrong, distant, like trying to hug someone through a glass wall. Vexil watched everything. He stood in corners of the medical bay, silent and still, those golden eyes tracking Taman's every move. Sometimes Taman would reach toward a patient instinctively, and Vexil would make a soft sound, not quite a hiss, more like a warning. Taman would pull his hand back and use the remote tools instead. "Why did you become a medic?" Hana asked him one day during their break. They sat in the human quarters, the only place on the station where touch was normal. She squeezed his shoulder in encouragement. The simple contact made Taman realize how isolated he'd felt. "I wanted to help people," he said. "All people, not just humans. I thought medical care was universal, that helping someone hurt was something everyone understood." "It is universal," Hana said. "But the methods aren't. You'll adjust. It gets easier, but it didn't feel easier." Every day, Taman felt the distance between himself and his patients. He wondered if they could feel it too. Did they know he wanted to help? Could they understand care that came through machines instead of hands? On his 8th day, an elderly Korathan came to the medical bay. She had fallen and injured her arm. Taman guided her to a floating bed and began the examination with scanners. The break was clean and would heal well with proper treatment. As he worked, the elderly woman began to slip sideways on the floating bed. The bed stabilizers were malfunctioning. She was about to fall. Without thinking, Taman reached out and steadied her with his hand on her shoulder. The woman gasped. Not in gratitude. In shock and fear, Vexil appeared beside them so quickly that Taman jumped. The Korathan officer's scales had darkened to almost black. His pupils had narrowed to thin lines. "Step away from the patient," Vexil said. His musical voice had gone flat and cold. Immediately, Taman pulled his hand back like he'd touched fire. The elderly woman stared at her shoulder where he'd touched her, trembling. She was falling. You touched her without permission, without need, without protocol." Vexil moved between Taman and the patient, a physical barrier. He spoke to the woman in their language, soft and soothing. She responded, her voice shaking. After she left, stabilized by Vexil using proper remote tools, the officer turned to Taman. His scales were still dark with anger. "Don't ever touch me again, human," Vexil said. Each word was precise and sharp. "Your kind doesn't understand the violence you carry in your fingers. You think you're helping. You think you're showing care. But to us, your touch is assault. It's invasion. It's wrong," Taman wanted to argue, wanted to explain that he'd only been trying to prevent injury. But looking at Vexil's face, at the genuine anger and fear there, he realized something important. His intentions didn't matter. His desire to help didn't matter. The cultural divide between them was deeper than he'd understood. "I'm sorry," Taman said quietly. "I didn't mean to cause harm." "Harm is not measured by intention," Vexil replied. "It's measured by impact. Remember that." The Korathan officer left the medical bay. Taman stood alone among the floating beds and remote tools, wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake coming to Harmony 7. Wondering if humans and aliens could ever really understand each other. Wondering what would happen the next time instinct and protocol collided. 3 weeks passed after the incident with the elderly Korathan woman. Taman worked carefully, keeping his hands to himself, using only the remote tools. Vexil watched him less closely now, though the officer still appeared regularly to observe. The tension between them hadn't disappeared, but it had settled into something like cold professionalism. Taman learned more about his patients. He discovered that the crystalline beings communicated through vibrations. The silver-furred aliens could see heat instead of light. Each species had its own needs, its own way of experiencing the world. He began to understand why touch was so complicated. What felt comforting to humans might feel painful or threatening to others. Still, late at night in the human quarters, he would sit with Hana and other human staff. They would share simple contact. A hand on a shoulder, a brief hug, a handshake. These small touches reminded Taman that he was still human, still connected to his own kind. It made the isolation of the workday bearable. Then came the day everything changed. The alarm started during the night shift. Red lights flashed through the station corridors. A voice announced emergency over the speakers, calm but urgent. Mass casualty event. Cargo vessel engine failure. All medical staff report immediately. Taman ran to the medical bay. Other staff were already there, preparing equipment. Hana shouted orders, coordinating the chaos into organized action. The floating beds arranged themselves in rows. Remote surgical tools powered on. Drones buzzed through the air, ready to assist. "What happened?" Taman asked a colleague. "Cargo ship carrying volatile fuel. Engine malfunction caused fire. They're evacuating the crew, but there are injuries. Bad ones." The first patients arrived within minutes. A medical shuttle docked with the station and injured aliens flooded into the bay. Burns, broken bones, smoke inhalation. Species Taman had never treated before. He moved from patient to patient using scanners, guiding remote tools, administering medication through injection drones. The bay filled with sounds. Alien voices crying out in pain. Medical equipment beeping and humming. Staff calling to each other in multiple languages. Taman's training took over. He stopped thinking and just worked. His hands moving controls with practiced precision even though they never touched actual flesh. Vexil was there too. The Korathan officer worked alongside the medical staff, helping to stabilize patients of his own species. He moved with surprising grace, his scales flashing silver under the bright medical lights. For the first time, Taman saw Vexil as more than just a watchful presence. He was skilled and dedicated, doing everything he could to help. Taman was treating a patient with severe burns when the second explosion happened. The shockwave hit the station hard. Taman stumbled. Equipment fell from storage. One of the large medical scanners mounted on the ceiling tore loose. It swung down like a pendulum, cables sparking. Vexel stood directly beneath it. "Look out," Taman shouted, but Vexel didn't move fast enough. The scanner crashed into him, catching his side and throwing him against the wall. He crumpled to the floor and the scanner landed on top of him, pinning his legs. Taman ran to him. Other staff were dealing with their own emergencies. Patients were screaming. Another human medic was helping someone whose species Taman couldn't identify. Hana was on the other side of the bay, coordinating response to the new injuries. "Vexel!" Taman shouted, dropping to his knees beside the fallen officer. He grabbed the scanner and tried to lift it. Too heavy. He needed help, but everyone was busy with critical patients. Vexel's eyes were open, golden, and filled with pain. His scales had gone pale, almost white. "Don't," he managed to say. "Don't touch," but Taman could see the problem. Korathan biology was different from human, but he'd studied it. There was internal bleeding. He could see it in the way Vexel's abdomen was swelling, in the color of his scales. The species had a major blood vessel that ran along the side of the torso. The scanner had crushed it. Without immediate pressure on the wound, Vexel would bleed to death internally in minutes. The remote tools couldn't apply the right kind of pressure. They weren't designed for it. A drone couldn't push hard enough. The robotic arms were too large, too clumsy. This needed hands. Skilled hands that could feel the right amount of pressure, that could adjust in real time. This needed touch. "I'm sorry," Taman said. "I'm so sorry." He placed his hands on Vexel's side, feeling for the damaged area. Vexel's scales were smooth and cold, like metal that had been left in shade. Taman found the swelling and pressed down firm and steady. He knew exactly how much pressure to apply. He'd done this 100 times in training, though never on a Korathan. Vexel's body went rigid. His eyes widened, not just with pain, but with something worse. Horror. Betrayal. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His scales rippled with colors Taman had never seen before. Dark patterns that looked like distress signals. "I know," Taman said quietly, maintaining the pressure. "I know this is wrong to you. I know you told me never to touch you. But you're dying and I can save you. So I'm going to keep my hands right here until help comes." Around them, the medical bay continued its chaos. But in this small space, it was just the two of them. Taman's hands on Vexel's side. Vexel's eyes locked on Taman's face, filled with emotions too complex to name. Another medic finally noticed them. She was Korathan, older than Vexel with darker scales. She rushed over with proper equipment. Taman explained quickly what had happened, what he was doing. The Korathan medic's eyes widened when she understood. "You're touching him. You're actually touching him. He was bleeding internally. I had to stop it." She said something sharp in the Korathan language. Then she set up her equipment, working around Taman's hands. "Don't move, not yet. I need to get the medical field in place first." It took 3 minutes. Taman counted each second. His hands stayed exactly where they were, applying steady pressure. Vexel never looked away from his face. The Korathan officer's scales had gone completely pale now, and Taman couldn't tell if it was from blood loss or shock or something else entirely. "Now," the medic said. "Move your hands slowly. I'll take over with the field." Taman lifted his hands away. An energy field immediately took their place, glowing soft blue, applying pressure where his hands had been. The medic scanned Vexel quickly, her expression serious. "The bleeding is controlled. We need to get him to surgery immediately." Other staff came to help. They lifted the scanner off Vexel's legs carefully. They transferred him to a floating stretcher. As they moved him away toward the surgical suite, Vexel's eyes stayed on Taman. There was no gratitude there, no understanding, just shock and something that looked like rage. The older Korathan medic stayed behind for a moment. She looked at Taman with an expression he couldn't read. "You saved his life," she said. "I didn't have a choice." "No," she agreed. "You didn't, but he will never forgive you for it." She left to join the surgery. Taman stood alone in the middle of the medical bay, his hands still tingling with the memory of Vexel's cold scales. Around him, the emergency continued. There were still patients to treat, still injuries to address. He went back to work. But he couldn't stop thinking about Vexil's eyes, about the horror in them, about what it meant that the worst thing he could do to someone was the thing that saved their life. Hours later, when the emergency finally ended, Hana found him sitting in a corner of the bay. She sat down beside him, not speaking at first. Then she put her hand on his shoulder, the simple human comfort he needed. "The Korathan officer will live," she said. "The surgery went well." Taman nodded. He felt exhausted. "Not from the physical work, but from everything else. He's going to report this, isn't he?" Taman asked. Hana didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was sad. "Yes, he probably will. You broke the most important rule. Even if you did it to save his life, would you have done the same thing?" "I don't know," Hana said honestly. "I hope I would have, but I don't know." They sat together in the quiet medical bay, surrounded by equipment and empty floating beds. Taman looked at his hands. These hands had saved Vexil's life. These hands had also committed what Vexil would see as an unforgivable violation. He wondered which truth would matter more. Vexil woke up 2 days after the surgery. The medical staff kept him in observation, monitoring his recovery. His injuries would heal, the doctor said. His body was strong and responding well to treatment. But nobody talked about the other kind of healing he might need. Taman tried to visit once. He stood outside the observation room, looking through the transparent wall. Vexil lay on the floating bed, his scales still pale but gaining some of their silver color back. When the Korathan officer saw Taman standing there, his whole body went rigid. His scales darkened immediately. He turned his face away, deliberately showing Taman his back. The message was clear. Taman left without entering. The formal complaint came on the 3rd day. Hana called Taman to her office and closed the door. She looked tired, more tired than he'd ever seen her. "Vexil has filed an official complaint against you," she said. "He's demanding your immediate removal from Harmony 7. He's also requesting that you be barred from working in any multi-species medical facility." Taman had expected this, but hearing it still felt like a physical blow. He would have died. "I know, and he knows that too." Hana pulled up documents on her desk display. "But from his perspective, you violated him. You touched him without consent while he was helpless. The fact that it saved his life doesn't change the violation he feels. So what happens now? There will be a formal hearing. Representatives from multiple species will review the case. They'll decide if your actions were justified under medical emergency protocols, or if you committed assault." She paused. "The problem is, this isn't just about medical rules. It's about culture, about what different species believe is right and wrong." Taman was placed on administrative leave immediately. He couldn't work in the medical bay. He couldn't treat patients. He spent his days in the human quarters reading about Korathan culture, trying to understand what he'd done from Vexil's perspective. What he learned made everything more complicated. The Korathan had nearly gone extinct 600 years ago. A plague had spread through their population, transmitted by touch. Skin-to-skin contact meant death. Millions died before they learned to avoid all physical contact. They rebuilt their civilization around this principle. No touching, ever. It became more than just a safety measure. It became sacred, holy, the foundation of who they were. Even after the plague was cured, the cultural taboo remained. To touch a Korathan without permission wasn't just rude or uncomfortable. It was a violation of their deepest beliefs. It was violence against their identity, and Taman had done exactly that. He also learned that Korathan physiology was sensitive to touch from other species. Their nervous systems registered unexpected contact as pain, not severe pain but enough to be deeply unpleasant. So Vexil hadn't just felt violated, he'd actually felt hurt by Taman's hands. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks after the incident. Those 2 weeks felt endless. Other human staff tried to support Taman, but they were dealing with their own concerns. If Taman was found guilty, it would affect all humans working in multi-species environments. Some aliens were already calling for humans to be restricted from medical work entirely. "You're too dangerous," one alien representative said in a public statement. "Your species can't control their need to touch. They call it compassion, but it's really aggression disguised as care." Not all aliens agreed. Some species understood emergency medical protocols. They argued that saving a life should matter more than cultural rules. But they were a minority. Most species sided with Vexil. Taman met with a human lawyer named Minji. She was young but sharp, with quick eyes and a faster mind. She reviewed all the evidence, all the medical data from that day. "Legally, you have a strong case," she said. "Medical necessity is recognized across species. When someone is dying and unconscious, consent is implied. You can't ask permission from someone who can't answer. But this isn't really about law. It's about feelings. About fear. Many species are scared of humans. They see us as impulsive, aggressive, too physical. This case confirms all their fears." She looked at him seriously. "Even if you win, you might lose. Do you understand?" Taman understood. Even if the hearing ruled in his favor, the damage was done. The trust was broken. Aliens would look at human medics and wonder if they were safe. 5 days before the hearing, something unexpected happened. Taman was in the human quarters when someone knocked on his door. He opened it to find a Korathan woman standing there. She was middle-aged, with dark bronze scales and kind eyes. "My name is Soman," she said. "I was one of the patients during the emergency. May I speak with you?" Taman invited her in, careful to keep distance between them. They sat across from each other, a respectful space maintained. "I heard about what happened with Officer Vexil," Soman said. "I heard about the complaint, and I wanted you to know something." She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "When you treated my injuries that day, you used a translator device. You asked my permission before any procedure that might involve contact. You were respectful, professional. You followed our protocols. That's how I was trained to work." "Yes. But Officer Vexil was unconscious. He couldn't give permission or refuse it." She looked at Taman directly. "I've thought about this many times. If I had been unconscious and dying, would I want someone to save my life by touching me, or would I prefer to die with my beliefs intact? What answer did you find?" "I don't know," she admitted. "And I think that's the problem. There is no easy answer. Your action saved a life but violated a soul. Both things are true at the same time." Soman agreed to testify at the hearing. She couldn't say whether Taman was right or wrong, but she could speak to his character, to his respect for Korathan culture when circumstances allowed respect. The night before the hearing, Taman couldn't sleep. He walked through the station corridors, looking at the stars through the massive windows. Somewhere out there was Earth, home, a world where touch was normal and needed and good, but he wasn't on Earth. He was here in a place where his most basic instincts could be seen as weapons. He thought about Vexil, about those golden eyes filled with horror and rage, about the cold feeling of his scales under Taman's hands, about the awful choice between letting someone die and committing what they would see as assault. "I would do it again," Taman whispered to the stars. "If I had to choose again, I would still save him." Even knowing what it cost, Hana found him there an hour later. She stood beside him looking at the same stars. "Ready for tomorrow?" she asked. "No, but I don't think I'll ever be ready." "That's okay. Courage isn't about being ready. It's about doing the right thing even when you're terrified." She was quiet for a moment. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you should know something. Every human on this station is proud of you. You saved a life. That matters. But to Vexil, I committed violence. That matters too." "Yes," Hana agreed. "Both things matter. That's what makes this so hard." They stood together in the quiet corridor, two humans far from home, trying to do good in a galaxy that didn't always understand what good meant. Tomorrow would bring the hearing. Tomorrow would bring judgment. But tonight they had this moment, this connection, this simple human comfort of standing together in the dark. Taman looked at his hands, the same hands that had saved Vexil's life, the same hands that had hurt him. He wondered if hands could be both healing and harmful at the same time. If intention and impact could both be true, if there was any way forward through this impossible situation, tomorrow he would find out. Tomorrow the galaxy would decide if a human's touch could ever be anything other than violence. Tomorrow everything would change. But tonight he just stood with Hana and watched the stars, gathering strength for whatever came next. The hearing room was designed to accommodate multiple species. The ceiling stretched high above, with different levels of seating. Some species needed water. Others needed different atmospheric pressure. The room provided for all of them, a testament to how far the galaxy had come in cooperation. But today that cooperation felt fragile. Taman sat at a table with Minji, his lawyer. Across the room, Vexil sat with his own representative. The Korathan officer looked healthier now, his scales bright silver again, but he still wouldn't look at Taman. Every time Taman glanced in his direction, Vexil stared at the wall, at the ceiling, anywhere else. The judge was a member of the Kelthori species, a being that looked like flowing water held together by energy. She spoke in a voice that sounded like rain. "We are here to determine if medical technician Taman acted within acceptable emergency protocols, or if he committed assault against Officer Vexil. Both parties will present their cases." Vexil testified first. He spoke clearly, his musical voice steady. But Taman could hear the emotion underneath. "I remember the pain," Vexil said. "The scanner crushing me. I remember trying to speak, trying to tell him not to touch me. But I was too weak. And then I felt his hands, alien hands, human hands, on my body." He paused. "In my culture, uninvited touch is violence. It doesn't matter why it happens. The impact is what matters, not the intention." "Did you understand that you were dying?" the judge asked. "I understood I was injured, but I would rather have died than been touched. That should have been my choice to make." Several alien representatives in the gallery made sounds of agreement. Taman watched them, these beings from cultures he was still learning to understand. To them, Vexil's position made perfect sense. The prosecutor, a tall alien with blue skin and multiple arms, presented evidence. Humans are classified as a high-touch species. They use physical contact for greeting, comfort, communication, and care. This makes them fundamentally incompatible with medical work in multi-species environments. They cannot suppress their instincts. Minji stood to cross-examine. "Officer Vexil, you said you would rather have died than been touched. But you are alive now. Has any part of you felt grateful for that?" Vexil's scales darkened. Gratitude and violation can't exist in the same space. "Yes, I'm alive, but I was violated to achieve that. How am I supposed to feel?" "I'm asking how you do feel. Confused, angry, hurt, betrayed." Vexil finally looked at Taman for the first time. "I told him never to touch me again. Those were my exact words, and at the first opportunity he did exactly what I forbade." "What does that say about his respect for my autonomy?" Taman wanted to respond, to explain, but Minji had told him to wait for his turn to speak. Then Soman testified. The bronze-scaled, Korthan woman described the emergency, the chaos, the injuries. "Medical technician Taman treated my injuries that day. He used proper protocols. He asked permission through a translator before any procedure. He showed complete respect for our culture. But he didn't show respect to Officer Vexil," the prosecutor pointed out. "Officer Vexil was unconscious and dying. There was no opportunity to ask permission." Soman spoke carefully. "I am not here to say whether Taman's action was right or wrong. I don't know the answer to that question. I'm here to say that he is not a person who disrespects our culture. He broke protocol once in an extreme situation. That is different from someone who breaks it carelessly." After Somin, other witnesses spoke. The older Korthan medic who had helped during the emergency testified that without Taman's intervention, Vexil would have died before they could get proper equipment in place. It was a matter of seconds, not minutes, seconds. Then it was Taman's turn. He stood at the testimony platform, aware of every eye on him. Some curious, some hostile, some sympathetic. "I want to be clear about something," Taman said. "I knew I was breaking protocol. I knew I was violating Officer Vexil's clearly stated boundaries. I knew he would see my action as assault. I understood all of that." The room was completely silent, but I also knew he was dying, and I had the skill to save him. So I made a choice. I chose his life over his autonomy, over his cultural beliefs, over his consent. Taman looked directly at Vexil. "I can't apologize for saving your life, but I can apologize for the violation you feel, for the hurt I caused, for making a choice that should have been yours to make. If you had to make the choice again, what would you do?" the judge asked. Taman answered honestly. I would save him again. I would accept any punishment for it, but I would make the same choice. Murmurs filled the hearing room, some approving, many disapproving. The prosecutor stood. This is exactly the problem with humans. They believe their judgment is superior to ours. They believe saving a life justifies any action, any violation. They can't respect boundaries because they think they know better. Minji responded. Medical necessity is recognized across all species. When someone is unconscious and dying, consent is implied because the alternative is death. This isn't a human principle. It's a universal one. But universal principles must bend to cultural realities, the prosecutor argued. For Corathan, death is preferable to violation. Their culture is clear on this. The hearing continued for hours. Experts testified about medical ethics. Anthropologists discussed cultural relativism. Medical staff from multiple species debated what should have been done differently. The arguments went in circles, everyone certain of their position, nobody changing their mind. Finally, the judge called for a recess. The hearing would resume the next day with her ruling. Everyone filed out of the room slowly. Taemin stood with Minji, feeling exhausted. That went as well as we could hope, Minji said, but I honestly don't know which way the judge will rule. Taemin noticed Vexil leaving the room, walking alone. The Corathan officer moved stiffly, still recovering from his injuries. On impulse, Taemin followed him into the corridor. Vexil, wait, he called. The officer stopped but didn't turn around. I have nothing to say to you. Then just listen. Taemin kept his distance, respecting the space between them. I've been researching your culture. I learned about the plague, about how your people nearly went extinct. I understand why touch is so important to avoid, why it's not just a preference but a deeply held belief. If you understand, then you know what you did was unforgivable. I know what I did was harmful to you. I know I hurt you, even while saving you. And I don't know how to make that right. Taemin paused. But I want you to know that I see you. I see your pain. It's not less important than your life. Both matter. Vexil was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer. My people have a saying, the body may survive what the spirit cannot. You saved my body, human, but you damaged my spirit. How do I live with both? I don't know, Taemin admitted. I wish I had an answer. For the first time, Vexil turned to face him. His golden eyes were still angry, but there was something else there too. Confusion, pain, maybe even a tiny fragment of understanding. I don't hate you, Vexil said quietly. I want to. It would be easier if I could just hate you. But I'm alive because of you, and I'm violated because of you. How do I hold both truths? Together, Taemin suggested. Maybe that's all we can do. Hold both truths together, even when they contradict each other. Vexil shook his head. That's very human of you, always trying to find balance to make peace. My people don't think that way. Some things can't be balanced. He walked away, leaving Taemin alone in the corridor. But something had shifted. Not forgiveness, not understanding, but maybe acknowledgement. That both of them were struggling with the same impossible situation from different sides. That night, Taemin couldn't sleep again. He lay in his quarters thinking about the hearing, about Vexil's words, about the impossible choice he'd made. Had he been right? Had he been wrong? Or were those the wrong questions entirely? Maybe the real question wasn't about right and wrong. Maybe it was about what you do when all choices cause harm. When saving someone means hurting them. When there is no good option, only less bad ones. He thought about his hands again. These hands that had learned to heal. These hands that had violated. Could they be both? Could he be both healer and violator at the same time? The stars outside his window didn't have answers. They just shone. Distant and eternal, watching the struggles of beings too small to see. Tomorrow would bring the judge's ruling. Tomorrow would decide his future. But tonight he was just a man trying to understand what it meant to do good in a complicated galaxy. A man whose hands had saved a life and damaged a soul, and who had to learn to live with both. The judge entered the hearing room with the slow grace of her species. The Kelthori being settled into her position, her water-like body reflecting light in patterns that might have been thought or emotion. The room fell silent. Every being present understood the weight of this moment. This decision would affect not just Taman, but every human working in multi-species environments. This case has presented a difficult question, the judge began, her rain voice filling the space. We must balance medical necessity against cultural autonomy. We must weigh the value of life against the value of consent. These are not simple matters. Taman sat very still, hands folded on the table in front of him. He could feel his heart beating too fast. Beside him, Minji maintained her professional calm, but he noticed her fingers tapping slightly against her data pad. Multiple species have submitted testimony, the judge continued. Some argue that medical technician Taman acted within acceptable emergency protocols. Others argue that he committed assault. Both positions have merit. The judge's form rippled, colors shifting through the water. Officer Vexel's testimony was particularly powerful. His pain is real. His sense of violation is valid. Culture is not merely preference. It is identity. It is the foundation of how beings understand themselves and their place in society. Vexel sat straighter, his scales brightening. For the first time since the hearing started, he looked hopeful. However, the judge said, and the tone of her voice changed slightly, we must also consider the circumstances. Medical technician Taman faced an impossible choice. Allow Officer Vexel to die or violate his cultural boundaries. There was no third option. The medical evidence is clear that without immediate intervention, Officer Vexel would have died within 2 minutes. She paused, letting her words settle. The law recognizes medical necessity. When a patient is unconscious and facing imminent death, consent is implied. This is not a human law. It is a principle recognized across most species, including Korathan legal codes. Vexel's scales darkened again. He looked at his representative, who appeared concerned. Therefore, this court rules that medical technician Taman acted within the bounds of emergency medical protocols. He is not guilty of assault. The judge's voice became firmer. However, this ruling comes with conditions. Medical technician Taman must undergo extensive cultural sensitivity training. He must work with a supervisor for a period of 6 months. And he must participate in developing better protocols for handling such situations in the future. Relief flooded through Taman, followed immediately by guilt. He'd won, but looking at Vexel's face, it didn't feel like winning. The Korathan officer looked devastated, his golden eyes wide with disbelief. This court acknowledges Officer Vexel's pain, the judge continued. What happened to him was traumatic. The fact that it was legally justified does not erase the violation he experienced. Both truths exist together. She addressed the gallery of beings watching. This case reveals a fundamental challenge in our multi-species society. We must find ways to respect cultural differences while also providing necessary care. The current protocols are inadequate. This court recommends that a committee be formed to develop better solutions. The judge concluded the proceedings. As beings began to file out, Taman saw Vexel stand abruptly and leave through a side door. The officer moved quickly, his body language radiating distress. Minji touched Taman's shoulder gently. You should feel relieved. This is the best outcome we could have hoped for. Then why do I feel terrible? Because you have empathy. Because you understand that legal victory doesn't heal emotional wounds. She gathered her materials. Take the rest of the day. Process this. Tomorrow you can start thinking about next steps. Taman didn't go back to the human quarters. Instead, he walked through the station, moving without destination. His mind kept replaying Vexel's face when the judgment was announced. The devastation, the betrayal, as if the galaxy itself had sided against him. He found himself in the observation deck, the same place where he'd stood the night before the hearing. The stars looked the same, eternal and indifferent to the struggles of small beings on small stations. I thought I might find you here. Taman turned. A human man stood behind him, someone he'd seen around the station but never formally met. He was older than Taman, with gray in his dark hair and kind eyes. I'm Jinwoo, the man said. I'm a psychologist on the station. I work with beings from multiple species, helping them adjust to life in multi-species environments. Did Hana send you? No. I came because I've been working with Officer Vexil. Jinwoo moved to stand beside Taemin, looking out at the stars. He's been having a difficult time processing what happened. The hearing didn't help. No. Jinwoo agreed. Legal answers rarely help with emotional questions. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Jinwoo spoke again. I've been having conversations with Vexil about what happened, trying to help him understand his own feelings. It's complicated. He has every right to be angry with me. Yes, he does, and he is angry. But he's also grateful, and confused, and guilty about being grateful, and angry about feeling guilty. Jinwoo smiled slightly. Emotions don't follow legal rulings. They're messy and contradictory. What did you tell him? I told him that both things can be true. He can be alive because of you and violated by you. He can be grateful and angry. He can acknowledge that you saved his life while still feeling hurt by how you did it. Jinwoo turned to look at Taemin. I've told him the same thing I'm going to tell you. This situation has no clean resolution, no perfect answer. You both have to learn to live with the messiness. How? One day at a time, one conversation at a time, one moment of understanding at a time. Jinwoo was quiet for a moment. Vexil told me something interesting. He said you followed him after the hearing, that you tried to talk to him. He didn't want to listen, but you tried anyway. You acknowledged his pain. You didn't make excuses or try to convince him he should feel differently. Jinwoo nodded. That mattered to him, more than he wants to admit. What happens now? Now you both heal. In different ways, at different speeds, and maybe eventually you find some kind of understanding. Jinwoo started to leave, then paused. Vexil is going to physical therapy this afternoon. His injuries still limit his movement. He's been struggling with some of the exercises. Just thought you should know. After Jinwoo left, Taemin stood alone with the stars for a long time. He thought about Vexil struggling with physical therapy, about the injuries that Taemin's touch had helped heal, about the emotional injuries that same touch had caused. He thought about going to the physical therapy center, about offering help, but Vexil didn't want to see him. The hearing had made that clear. Taemin had no right to force his presence on someone who had suffered enough, but he couldn't shake the image of Vexil struggling alone. That afternoon, Taemin found himself near the physical therapy center. He didn't go in. He just waited in the corridor outside, not sure what he was doing or why. Maybe he just needed to know that Vexil was okay. Maybe he needed to torture himself a little more. Through the transparent walls, he could see inside. The therapy center was designed for multiple species, with equipment that adapted to different body types. Vexil was there, working with a floating balance platform. The exercise was meant to rebuild core strength after internal injuries. Taemin watched as Vexil stepped onto the platform. It wobbled under his weight, requiring constant micro-adjustments to stay balanced. Vexil's scales were tight with concentration. He managed to stay balanced for a few seconds, then began to lose his equilibrium. The officer's body tilted too far to one side. He tried to overcorrect it and began to fall. There was no one close enough to catch him. The fall wouldn't cause serious injury, but it would hurt. It would set back his recovery. Taemin moved without thinking. He pushed through the door and ran across the therapy center. He reached Vexil just as the officer's balance failed completely. Taemin's hand extended, ready to catch him, ready to steady him. Then Taemin stopped. His hand was inches from Vexil's arm, close enough to help. But Taemin froze, remembering the horror in Vexil's eyes, remembering the hearing, remembering that his touch, however well-intentioned, was violence to this being. Vexil caught himself on a nearby rail, breathing hard. He looked up and saw Taemin standing there, hand still extended but not touching. Their eyes met. For a long moment, neither moved. Taemin's hand hung in the air between them. An offer, a question, a choice that Vexil could make for himself this time. May I help you? Taemin asked quietly. I won't touch you without permission, but if you want help, I'm here. Vexil stared at the extended hand. His scales rippled with colors Taemin couldn't interpret. The officer's breathing was still labored from the near fall and from something else. Emotion, confusion, maybe fear. The therapy room was silent. Other patients had noticed the tension and stopped their own exercises to watch. A Korathan therapist moved closer, ready to intervene if needed. Taman kept his hand extended, not moving closer, not pulling back, just offering, waiting, giving Vexil the choice that had been taken from him before. I don't... Vexil started, then stopped. His golden eyes were conflicted, full of feelings too complex to name. It's okay, Taman said gently. You don't have to decide right now, but I want you to know that I'm here. 3 weeks passed after the incident in the physical therapy center. Taman returned to work in the medical bay, but with restrictions. A supervisor watched him constantly. Every patient interaction was logged and reviewed. He followed protocols perfectly, never once reaching toward a patient without proper remote tools. But the tension remained. Some alien staff avoided him. Others watched him with suspicion, waiting for him to make another mistake. Only the humans and a few open-minded aliens from other species treated him normally. Vexil continued his physical therapy. Taman saw him sometimes in the corridors. They never spoke. Vexil would see Taman and immediately turn away or change direction. The Korathan officer's recovery was progressing well physically, but Jinwoo mentioned that emotionally, Vexil was still struggling. He keeps having the same nightmare, Jinwoo told Taman during one of their occasional conversations. In the dream, he's trapped and hands keep reaching for him. He wakes up feeling violated all over again. I gave him nightmares, Taman said quietly. How do I live with that? The same way he lives with being alive because of you. You carry it. You don't forget it, you let it teach you. Jinwoo paused. He's making progress, though. Slowly. He's starting to separate you from the trauma. Starting to understand that you're not a monster. Just a person who made an impossible choice. Is that enough? It's a beginning. Taman focused on his work and his training. The cultural sensitivity courses were intense, forcing him to confront his own biases and assumptions. He learned about dozens of species and their relationships with physical contact. Some found it painful, others found it offensive, a few found it literally toxic. Humans were unusual in their need for touch, and that made them dangerous in ways he'd never considered. One evening, Taman was working late in the medical bay. Most staff had gone for the night. He was restocking supplies, doing the quiet tasks that kept the bay running. The door opened and someone entered. Taman looked up and was surprised to see Vexil. The Korathan officer stood in the doorway, his scales catching the dim light. He didn't speak immediately, just looked around the bay as if seeing it for the first time. Officer Vexil, Taman said, keeping his voice neutral. Do you need medical assistance? No. Vexil paused. I don't know why I came here. Taman set down the supplies he'd been holding. He made sure to keep the width of the room between them. Would you like to sit down? Vexil moved to one of the floating chairs but didn't sit. He stood beside it, his body language uncertain. Jinwoo suggested I might need to talk to you. To process what happened, I told him that was ridiculous. But you're here. But I'm here. Vexil agreed. His golden eyes finally focused on Taman. I keep trying to hate you. It would be easier. But I can't. And that makes me angry. I understand. Do you? Vexil's scales darkened slightly. Do you understand what it's like to owe your life to someone who violated you? To wake up every day grateful to be alive and furious at how that was achieved? No, Taman admitted. I can't understand that. I can only imagine it, and even my imagination probably falls short of the reality. Vexil was quiet for a long moment. In my culture, we have a concept. Kelthera. It roughly translates to necessary evil. Something that causes harm, but prevents greater harm. We use it rarely, very rarely, because most of the time there are other options. But sometimes there aren't. Sometimes there aren't, Vexil agreed. I've been thinking about that, about whether what you did was Kelthera, whether I can accept it as such. He looked directly at Taman. I don't have an answer yet. That's okay, you don't owe me an answer, don't I? Vexil's voice became sharper. You saved my life. Doesn't that mean I owe you something? No, Taman said firmly. You don't owe me gratitude. You don't owe me forgiveness. You don't owe me anything. What I did because I'm a medic. Because saving lives is what I do. Not because I wanted something from you in return. Vexil's scales rippled through several colors. That makes it harder, you know? If you wanted something, I could refuse to give it. I could have that power. But you're taking even that from me. I'm sorry. I don't mean to. They stood in silence, the medical bay quiet around them. Outside the windows, stars drifted past slowly. Taman wanted to say something helpful, something healing, but he couldn't find the words. Maybe there were no right words for this situation. I've been attending physical therapy 3 times a week, Vexil said finally. The exercises are helping. My core strength is returning. But there's one exercise I can't do. It requires balance and stability that I haven't recovered yet. The rotating platform? Yes. I keep falling. And every time I fall, I remember falling before. In the medical bay, when the scanner hit me. When everything went wrong. Vexil's voice became quieter. I need to overcome it, but I can't do it alone. Your therapist can help. She tries. But she's not always quick enough, and she's older. If I fall awkwardly, I might hurt her. Vexil looked at Taman directly. I need someone younger, faster, someone who knows Korathan physiology well enough to catch me safely. Taman understood what Vexil was asking, and his heart ached with the weight of it. I don't want to hurt you again. You won't, because this time I'm choosing it. This time I'm giving permission. Vexil's scales had gone very pale. If you're willing. Of course I'm willing. But Vexil, are you sure? You don't have to do this. We can find another way. I know. But I think I need to do this. To take back some control. To make the choice that was taken from me before. Vexil's voice shook slightly. I'm terrified. But I think this is how I start to heal. 2 days later, Taman met Vexil at the physical therapy center. The Korathan therapist was there too, along with Jinwoo for emotional support. Vexil stood beside the rotating platform, his scales tight with tension. We'll go slowly, Taman said. And the moment you want to stop, we stop. Your comfort is more important than the exercise. Vexil nodded. He stepped onto the platform and it began to rotate slowly. Taman positioned himself nearby, close enough to help but not touching. His hands were ready but respectful of the space between them. For the first few rotations, Vexil maintained his balance well. But as the platform's speed increased, he began to wobble. His body tilted, and for a moment it looked like he would correct it. Then his balance failed completely. Taman reacted instantly, his body moving to catch Vexil before his conscious mind could even process what was happening. But at the last second he stopped himself. His hands extended but didn't touch. Just like in that moment weeks ago. May I? Taman asked, his hands hovering near Vexil's arm. Vexil was falling, unable to catch himself. His golden eyes met Taman's. Fear was there, but also trust and choice. Yes, Vexil said. Taman's hands caught him, steadying him before he could fall. The contact was brief, just enough to help Vexil regain his balance. Taman released him immediately, stepping back to restore the distance between them. Vexil stood on the platform, breathing hard. His scales were rippling with colors, emotions playing across his body like waves. The touch had hurt, Taman could see that. Vexil's species registered unexpected physical contact as pain. But there was something else in Vexil's expression too. Relief. Accomplishment. Again, Vexil said. They repeated the exercise. Again and again, Vexil would lose his balance. Again and again, Taman would ask permission. And each time, Vexil gave it. The touch never stopped hurting. Taman could see Vexil flinch each time their skin made contact. But each time was also a choice. A decision Vexil made for himself. After the session, Vexil was exhausted. He sat on a bench, his scales pale from the effort and the emotional toll. Jinwoo brought him water, and they sat in comfortable silence for a while. "That was incredibly brave," Jinwoo said quietly. "It was necessary," Vexil replied. "For my recovery, both physical and—" He gestured vaguely at his head and chest, indicating something internal. Taemin sat across from them, maintaining distance. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been beaten," Vexil said honestly. "My whole body aches. The places where you touched me feel raw." He paused. "But I also feel stronger. Like I took something back." "You did," Jinwoo confirmed. "You took back your agency. Your choice." They sat together for a while longer, three beings from different worlds trying to navigate the complexity of harm and healing. Vexil still didn't smile at Taemin, still didn't show warmth. But he also didn't turn away, didn't leave. That was progress. As Taemin walked back to his quarters that evening, he thought about what had happened. They hadn't solved everything. Vexil was still hurt, still traumatized. The touch still caused him pain, but they'd found a way forward. Not through forgetting or forgiving, but through choice and respect and the slow building of trust. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't clean. It wasn't the easy resolution that stories usually had. But it was real. And sometimes, real was better than perfect. His hands had steadied Vexil again today. But this time it wasn't violation. This time it was cooperation. This time, both of them had chosen it together. And that, Taemin thought, was how healing actually worked. Not through grand gestures or simple answers, but through small moments of chosen connection. Through the difficult work of building bridges one careful touch at a time. 6 months passed. The seasons changed on nearby planets, visible through the station windows as orbital shifts altered their appearance. Harmony 7 continued its endless rotation through neutral space, a meeting point for species learning to coexist. The medical bay had changed too. New protocols were in place now, developed by a committee that included both Taemin and Vexil. The protocols were called Consent and Context, and they were spreading to other multi-species facilities across the galaxy. The guidelines were simple but revolutionary. Medical staff were required to learn each species' relationship with physical contact. They had to understand not just the cultural taboos, but the physical reasons behind them. Training included learning to ask permission in multiple languages, learning to read body language across species, and learning when medical necessity truly required breaking cultural rules. But the most important change was the acknowledgement that both things could be true. Saving a life could be necessary and still cause harm. Respecting culture was important and sometimes impossible in emergencies. The new protocols didn't pretend there were easy answers. They just provided better tools for navigating the difficult ones. Taemin's supervisor status had been lifted after 4 months of perfect compliance. He worked freely now, trusted by most of the station's staff. Some aliens still avoided him, but others had come to respect his careful approach. His ability to ask permission in 17 different languages became something of a legend on the station. Vexil had fully recovered physically. His therapy had been successful, and he moved with the same fluid grace he'd had before the accident. Emotionally, the recovery was more complex. He still had nightmares sometimes, still flinched when people moved too quickly near him. But he was functional, working, living. The two of them had developed a professional relationship, not quite friendship. Not yet, but mutual respect. They would pass in corridors and nod to each other. Sometimes they would consult on difficult cases involving Korathan patients. Vexil would ensure the cultural protocols were being followed. Taemin would ensure the medical care was optimal. They didn't talk about that day, the emergency, the touch, the hearing. It existed between them like a scar, visible but no longer actively painful. One afternoon, Hana called Taemin to her office. She looked excited, which was unusual for her normally composed demeanor. "I have news," she said. "The committee's work has been noticed. Really noticed." The Interspecies Medical Council wants to implement our protocols galaxy-wide. They want you and Vexil to present at their annual conference. Taman felt surprise wash through him. Both of us? Both of you. They want to hear from both perspectives. The medic who had to make the impossible choice, and the patient who lived through it. Hana smiled. This could change how multi-species medicine is practiced everywhere. This could help millions of beings. Does Vexil know? I'm meeting with him next. But I wanted to tell you first, see if you're willing. Taman thought about it. Standing in front of hundreds of beings, talking about the worst day of his professional life, talking about the moment he'd violated someone to save them. It wouldn't be comfortable. I'll do it, he said. If Vexil agrees. Vexil did agree, though Hana mentioned he'd been hesitant. The conference was 2 months away, giving them time to prepare their presentation. They met in a small conference room to discuss what they would say. It was strange sitting across from Vexil in a professional setting, planning to tell their story together. Vexil had brought notes, his efficient mind already organizing the presentation into logical sections. We should be honest, Vexil said. Not just about the medical facts, but about the emotional reality. About how difficult this was for both of us. Agreed. People need to understand that following these protocols won't make everything easy. It just makes things better than they were. They worked together over several weeks, building the presentation. Sometimes their discussions became heated. Vexil would describe his experience, and Taman would realize new dimensions of the harm he'd caused. Taman would explain his reasoning, and Vexil would understand the impossible position he'd been in. I never wanted to hurt you, Taman said during one of these discussions. But I did hurt you. Both things are true. I know, Vexil replied. I'm starting to understand that. That you can be both the person who saved me and the person who violated me. That those aren't contradictions. They're just the complicated truth. The night before they were scheduled to leave for the conference, Jinwoo hosted a small gathering in the human quarters. It was a send-off celebration with human staff and a few aliens who had become friends. Vexil attended, standing awkwardly in the corner with a glass of water. Taman noticed him standing alone and approached, maintaining respectful distance. Not comfortable with human celebrations? Taman asked. They're very loud, very tactile. Everyone keeps almost touching each other. But Vexil's tone wasn't critical, just observational. It's interesting to watch. I'm starting to understand why you struggled so much with our protocols. This is normal for you. Touch is how we communicate care, how we show connection. Taman watched Hana across the room, hugging another staff member goodbye. It's hard to turn that off. You've learned, though. I've watched you work. You're careful now, deliberate. I had a good teacher. Someone who showed me what my touch could do to others. Vexil was quiet for a moment. I was talking to Jinwoo the other day, about forgiveness, about whether I need to forgive you for what happened. Do you? I don't know. Forgiveness implies that something wrong was done. But was it wrong? Or was it necessary? Vexil's scales shifted colors, showing his internal conflict. Maybe forgiveness isn't the right concept. Maybe it's acceptance, accepting that something painful was also necessary. That seems wise. Jinwoo suggested something else too. He said that maybe you need to forgive yourself, that you carry guilt for saving my life, and that's not healthy either. Taman hadn't expected that. I made a choice that hurt you. How do I forgive myself for that? The same way I accept it, I suppose, by understanding that the world is complicated, that we do the best we can with impossible situations. Vexil turned to face Taman directly. You know what's strange? I've learned more about humans in these past 6 months than in years of working around them. I always thought you were impulsive, aggressive, unable to control yourselves. And now I think you're just trying to connect, in the only way you know how. And when that way conflicts with others, it becomes complicated. Vexil paused. I think all species are trying to connect. We just have different languages for it. The conversation was interrupted by Hana calling everyone to attention for a toast. Taemin and Vexil separated, moving to their respective spaces in the room. But something had shifted between them. Not friendship yet, but something warmer than professional courtesy. Understanding, maybe, or at least the beginning of it. The conference was held on a neutral station even larger than Harmony 7. Thousands of beings attended, representing hundreds of species. The main hall was enormous, with translation technology that allowed everyone to understand each other in real time. When it was their turn to present, Taemin and Vexil stood on the stage together. Taemin could feel his heart racing. Beside him, Vexil's scales were tight with tension. They looked at each other briefly, acknowledging the moment, then began. They told the story honestly. The emergency, the impossible choice, the violation and the life saved, the hearing and the aftermath, the slow, difficult process of developing new protocols. They didn't hide the pain or pretend it was easy. Vexil spoke about his trauma, about the nightmares, about learning to separate necessary harm from unnecessary harm, about understanding that his culture's taboos were valid and also sometimes impossible to maintain in emergencies. Taemin spoke about learning to see his hands as potential weapons, about understanding that good intentions didn't prevent harm, about learning to ask permission in 17 languages and still knowing that sometimes there would be no one to ask. At the end of the presentation, they showed the new protocols, the training materials, the decision trees for medical staff facing cultural conflicts, the support systems for patients who experienced necessary violations. These protocols won't make everything perfect, Vexil concluded. They won't eliminate the tension between medical necessity and cultural autonomy, but they acknowledge that tension exists. They give us tools to navigate it with more respect and understanding. Both things can be true, Taemin added. We can save lives and cause harm. We can respect culture and face emergencies. The goal isn't to eliminate this complexity. The goal is to handle it with wisdom and compassion. The audience was silent for a moment after they finished. Then questions began. Difficult questions, challenging questions, questions that didn't have easy answers. Taemin and Vexil responded together, their different perspectives complementing each other. After the presentation, beings approached them. Some wanted to argue, others wanted to thank them. A few shared their own stories of cultural conflicts in medical settings. Each conversation reinforced how important this work was. On their last day at the conference, Taemin found Vexil on an observation deck. The Corathan officer stood alone, looking at the stars through the massive window.